Ken Weatherwax. The Untold Story, Early Life and Family Roots. Kenneth Patrick Weatherwax, the boy who would later be remembered as Pugsley Addams, was born in Los Angeles, California, into a family already tied to Hollywood. Unlike many child actors who stumbled into the business, Ken grew up surrounded by show business. His parents, William Mallister Weatherwax and Marjorie Keeler, had connections in film and television, and his extended family included Hollywood legends. Ken's mother, Marjorie, had worked in movies during her youth. But the most famous family member was his aunt, Ruby Keeler, an actress and dancer who became a 1930s icon after starring as Peggy Sawyer in the hit musical 42nd Street. Ruby's marriage to legendary singer Al Jolson further cemented the family's celebrity status, ensuring that Ken grew up with Hollywood royalty in his family tree. His half-brother from his mother's earlier marriage, Joey De Vieira, stage name Donald Keeler, also found fame as a child actor. He played Porky Brockway and Lassie and appeared in shows like The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis and My Three Sons. Later, Joey transitioned into music, recording jazz and drum albums that decades later would be sampled in modern hip-hop, even by artists like Tyler, the creator on his track Mr. Lonely. On his father's side, the entertainment ties continued. William Weatherwax, Ken's father, was a professional dog breeder and trainer. Along with his brothers Rudd and Frank Weatherwax, he trained the original Lassie dogs that became television icons. This meant Ken's family wasn't just involved in Hollywood, they were part of its very foundation. Growing up in this unique environment, it was almost inevitable that Ken would find his way into acting. Still, no one could have predicted that his role as the mischievous, chubby son of Gomez and Morticia Addams would define his life forever, a role that brought both opportunity and heavy burdens. Early auditions and landing the role by the time Ken was 6 years old. His mother encouraged him to audition for commercials. One of his earliest appearances was in an advertisement for Chesterfield toothpaste, where his round face and cheerful personality made him stand out. This led to several more commercial gigs, giving young Ken an early taste of life in front of the camera. His very first television role came in an episode of Wagon Train, titled The John Gilman Story. At the end credits, his name appeared as Stout Boy, a description that hinted at how casting agents often saw him: pudgy, heavyset, and the kind of child they could use for comic effect. Though it wasn't glamorous, it was a start. Everything changed when Ken's mother took him to an audition for a brand new television show based on the cartoons of Charles Addams. The producers were searching for a boy who looked like a living version of Charles Addams' original drawings. Plump, mischievous, and a little odd. When Ken walked into the room, his resemblance to the cartoon Pugsley was undeniable. Over several days, the auditions narrowed from dozens of children to just a handful. On the final day, actor John Uston, who had already been cast as Gomez Addams, was brought in to read lines with the children. Ustin later admitted that he immediately noticed something special about Ken: his natural timing, his innocence, and the way he embodied Pugsley without even trying. With Ustin's recommendation, the producers made their choice. Ken Weatherwax officially became Pugsley Addams, and his life would never be the same again. Life on the Addams Family set. The Addams Family set was unlike any other in Hollywood at the time. Though the show featured macabre humor, the environment behind the scenes was warm, supportive, and even nurturing, especially for the young. Actors Carolyn Jones, who played Morticia, treated Ken with kindness and often acted like a second mother on set. She ensured that the child actors felt comfortable, even when the hours were long. John Astin, meanwhile, became more than just a co-star. He acted as a mentor. He would rehearse lines with Ken, always encouraging him with positive reinforcement. If Ken flubbed a line, Astin never scolded him. Instead, he'd say, "That's okay. Let's take it from the top. turning every mistake into a learning opportunity. Another key figure in Ken's life was Jackie Coogan, who played Uncle Fester. Coogan had been a child star himself in the silent film era, famously starring alongside Charlie Chaplin in The Kid. Because of his own difficult experiences, Jackie became a fierce advocate for child actors. He made sure Ken and Lisa Loring, who played Wednesday Addams, were always treated fairly, had proper schooling on set, and were allowed moments of play between scenes. Ken would later describe Jackie as being like a big brother in real life, always looking out for him. The Addams Family only filmed 64 episodes, but for Ken, those 2 years were life-changing. He was now a recognizable face across America. Children saw him as the lovable, mischievous Pugsley. But behind the fame, challenges were already starting to form, ones that would follow him into adolescence. The show ends, reality sets in when The Addams Family ended in 1966 after only 64 episodes. Ken was still just a boy. For him, it felt like the end of an adventure, but for Hollywood, it marked the beginning of a problem that countless child stars have faced: typecasting. Agents and producers had difficulty seeing him as anyone other than Pugsley. Casting calls often labeled him as the chubby kid or comic relief neighbor, roles that leaned on his appearance rather than his talent. His mother, determined to protect him, refused many of these offers, not wanting Ken to be mocked or exploited for his weight. This protection, while well-meaning, also meant Ken's career momentum slowed dramatically. By the time he was a teenager, the once familiar stream of auditions had dried up. The harsh reality of school life outside of Hollywood, Ken's struggles were just as tough. He was re-enrolled in public school after The Addams Family ended, and the experience was brutal. The moment classmates recognized him as Pugsley, the teasing began. Instead of admiration, many kids saw an opportunity to bully. They called him names like Fat Pugsley and ridiculed both his weight and his television past. What began as innocent jokes quickly turned cruel and malicious. The constant bullying ate away at his self-esteem. Ken later admitted that he developed a deep sense of insecurity, often feeling ashamed of his appearance. Even though his mother tried to reassure him, the damage was real. Changing schools didn't help much either. Every time he enrolled somewhere new, his identity as Pugsley would catch up to him, and the cycle of teasing would begin again. He became withdrawn, quiet, and often preferred to be at home rather than in the classroom. Early signs of struggle. The constant bullying and lack of acting opportunities began to weigh heavily on Ken. By his teenage years, he was battling low self-esteem and depression. He often looked in the mirror wishing for physical changes that never seemed to come fast enough, like growing facial hair to look older and tougher. He also developed an unhealthy relationship with food, alternating between overeating and starving himself, believing weight loss would change how others treated him. Sadly, these struggles only deepened his feelings of isolation. Despite all of this, Ken still held on to a quiet hope that his life could turn around. And soon, he would make a bold decision that would give him the structure and confidence he desperately needed. Escaping into the military by his late teens, Ken was searching for a way out of the negativity that surrounded him. School had become unbearable, and acting opportunities were scarce. He needed structure, discipline, and above all, a new identity beyond Pugsley Addams. At just 17 and a half, with his mother's consent, Ken enlisted in the U.S. Army. He trained as a cavalry combat recovery specialist, a role that demanded both technical skills and mental toughness. For the first time in years, Ken found himself in an environment where he wasn't judged by his past or his appearance. The military gave him what Hollywood and school never had: discipline, purpose, and brotherhood. He thrived under the structure, and the camaraderie of fellow soldiers helped restore a sense of belonging. For a few years, Ken felt stronger, more confident and free of the stigma of being just Pugsley. Returned to civilian life after leaving the army, Ken carried with him newfound confidence. But civilian life was not easy. Without the daily structure of military service, old insecurities slowly resurfaced. Still, he managed to support himself with odd jobs before eventually landing steady work at Universal Studios. He started as a grip and stagehand, doing basic behind-the-scenes labor. Over time, he picked up valuable trade skills, especially in carpentry and set construction. Hollywood, which had once mocked him, now employed him in a different capacity. Not as a star, but as one of the invisible workers who kept the industry running. Ken adapted well to this life. He enjoyed the work, had his own apartment, and even began a serious relationship. For a while, things seemed stable. Yet beneath the surface, loneliness and bouts of depression never fully left him. Brushing with the Addams legacy in the late 1970s and early 1980s, Ken was occasionally invited to reunions and specials connected to the Addams family. Producers sometimes reached out for Halloween events or nostalgic television spots. But Ken often declined, embarrassed by his past fame and the weight it carried. He still kept in touch with some of his former castmates, and by all accounts, there was no bad blood. But unlike his peers who embraced their Addams family legacy, Ken preferred to live quietly. For him, Pugsley was both a fond memory and painful shadow. Despite his reluctance, he remained an important figure in the franchise's history. Fans who grew up watching the Addams family never forgot him, even if he wished he could forget Pugsley himself. Slipping into old habits, although Ken had built a modest but steady life working at Universal Studios, he still carried heavy emotional baggage. When his father passed away, Ken began drinking more heavily. Alcohol became a way to escape the constant negative thoughts that haunted him. Even as he traveled across the country building sets for films, he often felt like a drifter, working long hours, staying in studio-provided trailers, and drinking to fill the emptiness during downtime. Behind his humor and polite exterior, Ken battled loneliness and an inner voice that constantly reminded him of his childhood struggles. His mother's illness and sacrifice, a turning point came when his mother suffered a severe stroke. Ken, who had been working away from home, rushed back to help her recover. Doctors suggested placing her in a nursing home, but Ken refused, insisting that he would care for her himself. For months, he became her primary caregiver, helping her regain strength and ensuring she wasn't left alone. His devotion was proof of the deep bond he had with his mother, who had always been his biggest protector during his childhood career. When she suffered a second stroke years later, Ken made an even bigger sacrifice. He quit his job and returned home full-time, determined to keep his promise that she would never be abandoned. For Ken, it meant everything to be by her side. Sadly, his mother eventually passed away, leaving Ken devastated. Her death left him feeling untethered, and once again, the old darkness crept back. A lonely decline after his mother's passing. Ken lived in the family house for a while, sorting through belongings, photographs, and memories. The process only deepened his sadness. He often felt like he had no direction, no reason to keep going. A friend eventually suggested that Ken adopt a dog for companionship. Taking the advice to heart, he went to a shelter and found Buddy, a loyal companion who became his saving grace. Walking Buddy and caring for him gave Ken a sense of purpose when little else did. For a while, Ken tried to live simply. He packed his possessions into storage, loaded his car, and set out to sea. America with Buddy at his side. They made it as far as New Mexico before his car broke down. Taking it as a sign, Ken decided to stay for a while, living quietly and focusing on small joys. But money soon ran out, and reality forced him back to California. His possessions were eventually lost when unpaid storage bills led to their sale, leaving him with nothing but Buddy, a pistol, and memories he couldn't escape. Hitting rock bottom back in California, Ken's situation grew dire. Homeless and moving between couches, he struggled to hold on to hope. Depression weighed heavily on him, and even Buddy, his loyal dog, couldn't always keep the dark thoughts away. At one of his lowest points, Ken considered ending his life. He even devised a plan, but in a twist of fate, a chance encounter shifted his path. While trying to sell his late parents' property, he visited a local church in search of guidance and connection. There, he met people who encouraged him to open a Bible he had carried with him for years. A turning point through faith. That night, Ken sat under a tree with Buddy by his side and began reading from the Gospel of Matthew. For the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of peace. He returned to church the following Sunday, where he made a public confession of faith and was baptized by Pastor Jesse Stevens at the Chatsworth Advent Christian Church. This moment marked a turning point. Slowly, Ken began to rebuild his life, letting go of the anger and bitterness he had carried for so long. His church community welcomed him with open arms, and he finally felt like he belonged somewhere, not as Pugsley, not as a forgotten actor, but simply as Ken. Reconnecting with old friends as Ken embraced his faith and healing, he also reconnected with some of his Addams Family co-stars. Lisa Loring, who played Wednesday, reached out after hearing of his struggles. The reunion meant the world to him, reminding Ken that he wasn't alone in his journey. He also began attending comic conventions, where fans still remembered him fondly. Though he had once rejected his Addams Family legacy, he now found joy in meeting those who cherished the show. Signing autographs and sharing stories allowed him to embrace the role that had both defined and haunted him for decades. Final years in passing. In his later years, Ken lived a quieter, more peaceful life, supported by his faith, his friends, and the enduring bond with his fans. He had endured so many struggles, bullying, depression, poverty, but in the end, he found solace in the simple joys of community and connection. Sadly, in December 2014, Ken Weatherwax passed away at his home in West Hills, California, at just 59 years old. He had suffered a heart attack. His funeral was attended by friends, family, church members, and former colleagues, including Addams Family co-stars Lisa Loring and Butch Patrick, best known as Eddie Munster. Ken was laid to rest at Valhalla Memorial Park Cemetery, the same resting place of many Hollywood legends. His life, though filled with hardship, left an enduring legacy of resilience, redemption, and the timeless role of Pugsley Addams. Legacy of Ken Weatherwax. Ken's story is more than just a tale of a child star. It's the story of someone who carried the heavy shadow of fame, battled depression and loneliness, but ultimately found peace and meaning in faith, friendship, and the love of fans who never forgot him. The little boy who once made America laugh, as Pugsley Addams may have struggled behind the scenes, but in the end, Ken Weatherwax's life reminds us that even in the darkest moments, redemption is possible.